Welcome to our webinar. As you join, we'll get started at the top of the hour exactly. But as everybody's joining and getting ready, we have a question up on the slide in front of you. So go ahead and pop into the chat and let us know, how do you get into the right state of mind when you need to lead an engaging meeting? And as you're saying hello in the chat, I invite you to go ahead and make that chat message out to all panelists and attendees. So go ahead and share your answer. How do you get into the right state of mind when you need to lead an engaging meeting? And looking outside my window, there are a couple of squirrels going entirely nuts. So I think one of the things that I should do is probably close my window so that I am not quite so squirrel distracted.
Actually, I love watching them. They do some pretty fancy things on telephone wires around my place as well.
Yeah, squirrels. Yeah, it's a love-hate relationship with the squirrels. All right, so we've got some answers coming in. Go ahead if you can and flip your answers so they go to all panelists and attendees. But it looks to me like we see people saying they prepare. It's a great answer. We had another answer is that they think of the purpose. I think of my purpose in life. Wow, that's even deeper. Are you there then to serve that group? Excellent. Another answer here, they double check their agenda and give themselves 5 minutes of quiet. Love that. Love the deep breathing kind of moment to focus.
Yeah, I have a favorite one where I cross my hands and call it the heart brain coherence, and I cross my ankles, and it just like I sit there by myself and just breathe deeply for a few minutes, and it really helps bring both my brain waves and my heart waves into synchronicity, so that I can think more clearly.
Wonderful. That's lovely. We have just a few more minutes before we get started with the formal part of our presentation. So as you are joining us, go ahead and answer in the chat. What do you do? How do you get into the right state of mind when you need to lead an engaging meeting? I know for me, it's very much important for me to stop and remember that everybody who's coming to that meeting is rooting for me to make that an interesting, engaging opportunity. They want to be engaged. They want to be successful. So when I know that everybody in the room is also interested in having a good time, that really helps.
Yeah, that's brilliant, Elise. Just remember that everybody's on your side. They want their meeting to go well, and therefore they're going to try and support you as best as they can. Absolutely.
All right, it looks like we've got just one more minute as people are joining in. If you've just joined us, welcome. And while we're waiting to get started, we will start at the top of the hour. Go ahead and answer in the chat. What do you do to clear your head and get engaged, ready to lead an engaging meeting? John says that he meditates for 5 minutes to clear his mind. And Beatrice says she takes a few minutes with her client and her contact or her co-facilitators to focus her collective energy.
Hello, Beatrice. So nice to see somebody I know.
All right. And with that, welcome. It is the top of the hour. Let's go ahead and get started. So thank you so much for everyone for joining us today for How to Lead Engaging Meetings. We're going to talk about how to lead engaging meetings specifically, and also the new course by our guest today, Barbara McKay, on exactly how to do that. But before we get into looking at the course itself, I thought it would be important for us to take a moment and just explore, what is meeting engagement anyway? Like, what does that mean? And the reality is that there's an entire spectrum of ways in which people can engage. Some of which are less desirable than others. So at the far end, we have engaging in meetings in disruptive ways. People who are arriving late, doing side conversations, perhaps they're even belligerent or abusive in the conversation. This is just unacceptable behavior. And then we end up moving away from unacceptable into, a behavior that's not so great. We have folks who are in our meetings who are distracted. Maybe they're checking their email, maybe they're on their phone, maybe they're, paying attention to other things. And then we get into the meeting attendees who are there and they're attentive. Maybe they're writing in their notebooks, maybe they're sitting quietly, maybe they're looking at you. They're paying attention. The problem, however, with this kind of engagement for those of you who lead meetings is that you can't actually tell from the outside the difference between someone who's actively listening and taking notes and someone who's looking at you while thinking about their lunch. Which is why often when we talk about meeting engagement, what we're really interested in is moving people into participating. So somebody who's participating is answering questions when asked, they're following along with the exercises, they nod along in agreement, they're responding. It's a reactive kind of engagement, but it's engagement. And then ideally, when you get the most engaged meetings, the most engaged groups, you're getting into places where people are actively contributing. So they're raising their own questions, they're bringing up their own ideas, they're offering new value to the group. Or they're taking a high performance behavior like actually owning the success of the meeting by presenting, taking an active role, maybe they're the note taker or the timekeeper, or maybe they're a leader, challenging the group, moving them towards a better result. But along this entire spectrum, we've got engagement. And the active engagement comes in all of these forms, from the disruptive to the participating. So what we're here to talk about today is how we can get more of the engagement on the right side of good. Now, when we set these webinars up, we often ask, what are you experiencing? What made it so that you wanted to come to a webinar like this? And these are the kinds of answers we typically see. So lots of people have some trouble with people not showing up, but really our bigger troubles are either the one or two people who are dominating the discussion, which then creates, 63% there you can see of people who are not speaking up at all. And then in the middle, a whole bunch of people who are distracted, maybe not paying attention, arriving late, arriving early, all kinds of challenges. Now, I know it's really common in the modern era to attribute a lot of this inattention and this distractedness to technology. But I have to tell you, this is not a new problem. In fact, if you look back in the history books, in the 14th and 15th century craft guilds, so these are some of the first professional associations we have records for, they had a law that said they were allowed to issue on-the-spot fines to guildsmen if they spoke without permission, incited others, or spoke to others in rebellious or indecent ways. So they were challenged in their craft guild meetings to get appropriate engagement. And the problem became so extreme in one case that they passed a law in 1457 saying that those who are dealing with outside business during these meetings would be condemned to death. A little bit extreme for our attendees who are checking outside email during meetings, but at least this is not new to cell phones. This is not new to technology. This has been a problem for hundreds and hundreds of years. Back then, the way they dealt with it was rather extreme. Today, we are quite lucky and blessed that while we have the same challenges that we have had for hundreds of years, we also now benefit from decades of research, master facilitation in terms of techniques and experimentation and testing to see what works. And that's why I am super thrilled to introduce you to our presenter today. We're going to have a quick presentation, and then we're going to spend the bulk of our time together on Q&A. So if you have questions, and I hope you do, please, please, please be ready to share those. The chat is open, so you can chat with me. I will stop talking and be there and chat to help you out. And then as you have questions throughout the presentation, if you add those to the questions box where it makes it easier for us to find them, we'll answer those at the end. And then yes, for all of you who are wondering, we will in fact share the recording afterwards. So with that, let me introduce Barbara McKay. She is the founder of North Star Facilitator. She's a certified professional facilitator and an IAF, that's the International Association of Facilitators Hall of Fame inductee. We're really thrilled that Barbara could be here today. We had talked about doing this earlier in the month, but she was far too busy giving trainings and facilitation workshops in Kuala Lumpur and Singapore and all over the world. And she's here today to help us benefit from some of that actual research and experience and practice so that we can have more engaging meetings. Thank you, Barbara. I'll let you take it from there.
Well, thanks, Elise. It's always a pleasure to be with people, although I cannot see you, which would be lovely if I could, but to be with people who are interested in helping people think well together. And I guess I got into the profession over 25 years ago because I noticed in my own consulting firm, it wasn't my consulting firm, it was I was a staff member of a smaller consulting firm, and this is in Saskatchewan, Canada. And at that time, we used to have weekly team meetings, and I actually really enjoyed them, but we would literally just go and do updates, and that's all we did. And there was just nothing fancy about them. They were fairly simple. I enjoyed them, but I knew they could have been better. And then when I got up north doing remote Indigenous community work, I noticed that people were talking at the Indigenous communities, and it really went, oh my goodness, like this is wrong. We need to be listening to them. We need to find out what the impact of some of the development projects were on them. That's when I was a socioeconomic consultant. So that's how my passion for bringing people into a room together, whether it's a virtual room or an in-person room, came about. And I was really pleased when Elise asked me to create a virtual course on engaging meetings. And so I noticed some of you were saying in the beginning, prepare, prepare, prepare. I love that. Yes, there's so much. You prepare yourself. Some of you talked about being silent. Some of you talked about meditating, deep breathing. Sometimes I'll go for a walk, or I'll literally have something that I can look at that makes me really happy. I'll make sure that I'm well nourished. So preparing yourself, preparing the group. What are we going to do when we come into this room? How will I contribute? How could I contribute? So there's so many things. I mean, there's thousands of small things we can do to meet the problem of, Elise, your graphic showed like 63% said, my biggest problem is people are not contributing, and 48% are they're over contributing. So definitely that's a key place to focus on. And so we find ourselves in meetings a lot, and I wonder if, Elise, you could bring up the first poll and just find out how many meetings are you leading, and then if you want to pop in the chat box as well, how many meetings are you attending? But I'm just curious, how many meetings are you leading right now? We've got several options for you to answer there.
And it looks like answers are coming in. Let's see, we've got a really strong cluster around one of these answers.
Okay.
And we'll give people just a couple more seconds to answer the poll if you haven't already. So the question is, how many meetings do you lead in a week? And we're going to close that out in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. And let's take a look at those results.
Okay, great.
It looks like 1 to 3 is a very popular answer.
Yeah, and typically our meetings are half an hour to 2 hours. So even if you're only leading 1 to 3 meetings, it's several hours a week, and that's an enormous amount of valuable time, because you're not the only person in the room. There are potentially 5, 10, 20, 30 people in the room. I remember being somewhat shocked in a large not-for-profit in the city in which I live right now, Portland, Oregon. And I entered the meeting, and there's about 20 people in the meeting, and everyone comes in, and 2 people do all the talking. And literally, no one talked for an hour. And I went, oh my goodness, they had spent a lot of time preparing for this meeting, and they were just giving them information. It could have been done, you could have looked at that information in your email or on a video I just felt, wow, you just wasted 20 people's time. I could not believe it. So I'm curious as well. There's a second poll we have for you is like, where are you spending your meeting time? What sectors are you in? Are you in government, not-for-profit? So just take a minute to fill that in now. And that gives me a bit of an understanding of who you are in this audience right now. And I can address some of those peculiarities of sectoral work. I won't say a lot about it, but.
Boy, I don't know that they're going to let you get too specific because we've got answers in every single one of the buckets already.
Well, that's actually a really good sign
Mm-hmm.
because that means that we have this common issue really around how do we have engaging meetings in every sector that we work in. And it's very interesting to me because I'm about to apply for a visa to China, Saudi Arabia, and Russia. And those three countries are going great guns on wanting to lead more engaging meetings. And that gives me a lot of hope in the world that, from my very narrow, limited perspective, that some of the countries that we've considered to be somewhat hierarchical in their policies, that they are now looking towards being more collaborative in their meetings and in their the way they engage with each other. And so I just am heartened. So let's hear what sectors people are working in, and
All right, let's go
let me
ahead and
say a
end
couple
this
of things.
poll in 3, 2, 1. And we'll share those results.
Okay, so we got 30% from nonprofit and 9% from government, large business, almost 30%, small business, almost a quarter. Yeah, and some of you might be kind of mixing back and forth. You may actually be independent people that are working in different sectors. And I worked in the corporate sector for a small not-for-profit, a small corporate sector organization. I also worked for a church, so that was a not-for-profit. And I worked for government. I worked for a federal government. And now I work probably in all sectors, probably a little less in the business sector. But I notice that it doesn't matter what sector you're in. Let me just say this. I have noticed more government, and again, it really depends on the country that I'm in, but more government is training their people to be skilled in leading meetings and training them in facilitation skills. And now that's really impressive. Small not-for-profits and large not-for-profits, a little less so, but somewhat. And corporate are not particularly good unless they have an in-house corporate team. That I think there's just a few really advanced, I'm using the wrong language, but I think there's a number of large corporate organizations that are not taking advantage of getting their people trained in facilitation skills and facilitative leadership. And so that's something that I'm hoping will change very soon. Feel free to answer this or ask a question or answer this in the chat pod, but and Elise, if you wouldn't mind putting this question, I didn't actually make a slide for this, but what would you say, given the sector that you're most involved in, what would you say their strength is in meetings? And what I have seen as strengths for some of the organizations I worked with is that they are asking their younger employees sometimes to lead meetings, which is very encouraging to me. They are trying to get multiple people co-facilitating, and yet what I'm seeing instead of co-facilitating, great, I'm seeing some answers come in. This is awesome. Yeah. Passion.
Yeah, so so the way that the answers are coming in, I don't think everybody can see them. So let's go ahead and read some of those out.
Okay.
So Sarah says that her sector benefits from big brains. I'm not sure which sector that is, but it sounds like a fun sector to be in, as does Bia's sector because they have decent refreshments. Tosca's got passion for the cause. I see a lot of that in the nonprofits that we work with. They've got good passion for sure. And Laura has the same answer, passion for the work. Anna mentions that in the nonprofit world, people are often not afraid to voice an opinion, which may stretch over too much time in the meeting. Now, so that's an interesting question about engagement, and actually something I ran into in a workshop I did earlier this week. How you balance that need for the voices with also your need to be done. Couple other answers. In some sectors, they're organized. They've got clear agendas. Now, certainly we see that in the corporate sector when you get farther up into the performance ranks. They are good about being organized. Robert says they have a weekly structured meeting and they cover a lot of ground, but the structure does sometimes feel like it can stymie critical thinking and discussion. So there are some interesting polarities people are balancing with. And then, yes, thank you for the tip. Someone says, change your chat to all panelists and attendees if you want everybody to see it and you don't want me to just read it out. All right.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad that now everybody can see it. Yeah. And Elise, do you want me to continue reading out some of the answers?
Why don't you take it from here? Yep.
All right. So John was saying efficiency of meetings with the large corporate sector, and Marta was saying people want to be involved, and I think that's great. And there's this little smiley face from Claudine. So thank you. And I do want to emphasize that there's a lot of strengths. I often ask my partner, like, how are meetings going for you? And he'll say, well, they're not bad, they're fairly short, and he's an engineer and they resolve problems and things like that. And I can't get much more out of him because he's an engineer. But I am really thrilled that some people actually are finding meetings working. But what we are finding is that most people are saying meetings are a waste of time. I am in too many meetings. I'm hearing one person's voice or a couple people's voices more than anything else, and I don't really know how I can contribute. And so in this engaging meetings course, we talk about some of those beliefs and assumptions that we have when we are running the meeting versus the people coming in to participate in the meeting. And your job really is to get everyone participating, because why call a meeting if you are not having them participate? If you're just giving them a download of information, that can be done in 100 other much more effective ways. It's nothing wrong with a short download of information so people are hearing the same thing at the same time. Then you need to have the proper questions to debrief. What did we actually all hear in that presentation? What are the details each of you picked up? What's kind of really exciting about this information, what's intriguing. And so we also in our course talk about, how do you ask really good questions to make sure that people are contributing. And one of the things that I think I've seen in your data, Elise, and also I don't see it very often because I'm usually the one facilitating, but I'm believing from you that people are not anxious to actually answer a question. So the problem with our questions sometimes, I'm just going to give you a little tip here, is our question is closed or it's a leading question. And so we might say, so what's a strength about this, and nobody thinks there's a strength, but you want to make sure that everybody knows there's a strength to this new strategy or policy that's being proposed. And therefore people are afraid to answer because they don't actually, that's not the first thing that comes to their mind, that there is a strength here. They actually can think of some of the weaknesses. And so we need to be careful to say, I'm going to ask for both strengths and weaknesses of this. I want us to just tear this policy apart. Take a minute. The other thing that you can do is for people who are less likely to speak out loud and for fear of saying something wrong, is give them a minute just to write down their answers to a question. Pop the question up in writing, say, okay, so what's the strength of this policy and what's a weakness of this policy? Write it down, share it with one other person just next to you for a minute. Now you might think, well, that takes a long time, but maybe that takes 3 minutes. And then you get the rich answers because people have thought in their head, they've tested their idea with one other person, and now one of them will feel confident to say, yeah, actually both of us had the same idea. I can put this in front of the group. And so in 3 minutes, you're getting not only tested data, but you're getting answers that are richer and people are then contributing. And so that's so easy to do, but we think it's going to take way too much time. And actually, we cover that in the course as well. It's all the reasons why we find that we can't break a group into small groups. You know, like, there's only 5 people in my meeting. I couldn't possibly break the group into a smaller number. Well, yeah, you could do pairs work at least 3 times in a half-hour meeting for like 2 minutes, and it can make a very, very big difference. So I'd like to ask that last poll, Elise, before we go to questions and answers. And because some of you have some fantastic ideas about what you know will work in your particular meetings.
Okay, so the question is, which of these things do you think will engage the people in your meetings the most? And it's a multiple choice, so you are welcome to fill out as many of these as you want. Answers include starting the meeting by having everyone share one thing that they're proud of with, a right to pass. Regular, short, energizing activities. Barbara, what's an example of an energizing activity?
Thanks, and I'm glad you asked that question, Elise. So it might be as simple as stand up and walk over to the corner flip chart, and, pop your Post-it note on the flip chart. I mean, that could be energizing. It could be there's like 2 or 3 minute games. I actually have a handout that I just did for a conference session in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, and we've come up with about 20 different really meaningful energizers. But they don't have to be long. You might get people to share with 3 different people something that you think is going well with the project. And so you find 3 different people, you give them 30 seconds each. And so in 2 minutes, people have shared that, gotten the energy up in the room, and the positive emotional state of participants, and then you can have them to sit down. So that's an example of a short energizing activity.
So, so an energizing activity, it sounds like one of the things you might want to look for in those is some sort of movement, which I know for our folks on remote calls that there are questions about how to do that. There are definitely answers about how to do that, but that'll be interesting to talk about. Some other answers here: break into small groups with a clear assignment and product deliverables. Water, coffee, tea, and snacks. I have to say, I wrote an article for Inc. about snacks. I thought it was a little flippy piece, fluff piece. And by golly, if not every interview I've been in, have they asked me about snacks since then. Snacks are off the hook popular. Include toys and fun, beautiful things to touch and look at. Ensure people know why they're at the meeting and what the objectives are. Isn't that a handy one? And provide visuals of important data, key questions, and instructions or other. And for those others, adding your answers into the chat here is useful as well. And we're going to go ahead and close this one in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now let's take a look at these answers.
Well, we certainly have the 83% leading the way with ensuring people know why they are at the meeting, what the objectives are. And that's such an obvious one, but it will make a huge difference. And I think people were saying earlier, prepare, prepare, prepare. Well, make sure people, I always ask people, what should we include in this meeting ahead of time? And so I think that's a great answer. And it's not the only thing you can do. But if you don't do that, you're going to lose a lot of engagement because people don't really know why they're there. And then every activity, every piece of your meeting should point to achieving an objective. Like maybe it's making a decision. Maybe it's just bringing people up to speed on something. But people need to know the clear product you're going to end up with, or at least the next steps to get to that eventual product. So that was really popular, and obviously 61% was the next one. Everybody can see this, right, Elise?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, so providing visuals.
Y'all holler if you can't see it, because this is your visual.
Yeah, please do. Yeah, so providing visuals, and then people may not know also that they can pop that. If they want to continue seeing your Elise, then they can pop the poll off to the side by just putting their mouse over it.
Everybody says they can see it. Thank you so much for your input.
Yeah, this is great. You're participating really well. I love this engagement. This is great, and I can't even see it. So ensuring people know why they're at the meeting, we said that was number one. The number two thing that came up was the visuals. And it seems obvious to me, but I see it done so rarely. But when you ask a group a question, especially if you're going to break them into small groups, but even as a large group, asking the question and then putting the question in, on flip chart markers, in large font on your whiteboard, however you do it on your screen, whatever your technology is, could be like very low technology or high technology. Put the question up in writing, because people forget what the question is. People start answering it. People who are long-winded, then you think, well, what was the question again? And if you have that question up in writing, it's going to really encourage people to keep answering it. And then you say it verbally again. Thank you very much for your input. Long-winded people, you can say. Now, we've just heard, let's say, Sarah provide an answer to this. And I want to make sure that Sarah knows that people understood her answer, because you don't want to say because it was so long, but I want to make sure people understood Sarah. So could someone else in the room just sum up a key point they think that Sarah made in her answer? That not only gives everybody the succinct form of Sarah's answer, but Sarah goes, oh yeah, that's good, that's good, that's kind of what I wanted to say. Or Sarah can say, and also blah, blah, blah. And then if Sarah starts to monopolize again, and or in terms of going into a monologue, you can say, Sarah, we're just wanting the key point here, like in 3 to 5 words, and to be somewhat direct with them. And that would be a favor to everybody. Well, by balancing out the dominant talkers, you also create the space for the ones who are more hesitant to talk. And so just leaving space for those, well, the 63% statistic we cited earlier about people not contributing, there's many, many reasons, but providing enough space for them in the meeting to do that, and a number of techniques. Elise, will you be sharing the results of that poll I know they'll see it in the recording, but can they get like a written copy of it? Or it's quite
we can certainly do that if people would like. I can absolutely send those.
All right, okay.
Yeah.
And then can you just bring it up for one more second? Sorry about that. There's just 2 or 3 other answers that I wanted to comment on.
You bet, I think. Let's find out.
You
All
did.
Right, there we go.
Great. So the next highest answer was regular short energizing activities, which we talked about. Water, tea, coffee, snacks can make a huge difference, especially if people have come in first thing in the morning and they maybe haven't had their breakfast, or their make sure your snacks, unfortunately, I see a lot of people using sugar-loaded snacks, carbohydrate-loaded snacks, and I would say keep those to minimum. Find out what your group likes, but some kind of protein bars or nuts and whatever is acceptable to your country. But we have voodoo donuts here in Portland, and I know that's a really, really big treat, and people cart them off in the airports and bring them home with them, but they're definitely not a great meeting item. And you might have one that you split into 16 parts just just as a treat, or like a really dark chocolate, because that can be a pick-me-up, but not an overload on. So that's what I would say. And water, we need water to keep thinking well. So really encourage people to drink water. Speaking of water, and then other people said start the meeting by having one share one thing they're proud of. And the reason that I put that in there, there's no wrong answers in here actually in this poll. But I said, start the meeting by having one share one thing they're proud of. It could be related to something on the meeting agenda. It could be just something they're doing in the team environment or in their organizational environment. It could even be personal. And you decide what's more appropriate for your meeting and your culture. But by doing that, everyone's voice has spoken. You've gotten everyone contributing. Once a person has spoken once in a meeting, the statistics are they're more likely to speak again. And so getting them to share something in the very beginning that they feel positive about, it's a way to keep that positive emotional state. So even if the meeting is something very difficult to talk about, to start off the meeting on a positive note can really make a difference to your engagement and to the productivity of the ideas offered. So I'll stop there and pass it back to you, Elise, for our.
Well, and there's one here that I would love to comment on for a second,
Okay,
if that's
please.
okay.
Mm-hmm.
So the one that got the beyond other, that got the fewest votes was include toys and fun or beautiful things to touch and look at. And as somebody who works primarily in the corporate sector, I understand that hesitation. That was certainly my feeling about it earlier, but I just got back from doing a full day workshop, and it was, we talked about, I'm the meeting maven, right? So we talked about meetings from 9 to 5:30 with 40 people in a room. How do you keep 40 people in a room talking about meetings engaged the whole time? So one of the things they had were pipe cleaners. And afterwards, and when we did the round of appreciations and everything, like 10 people said the pipe cleaners saved them because they were able to keep their hands busy and have something that helped them stay present and not check out and be on their phones and all of that when they were in the room, because there was, a way to channel some of that fidgety energy. So I wouldn't dismiss that one out of hand. It was actually a really useful tool.
Yeah,
And they had like cool like bugs and flowers, and they made all kinds of like pipe cleaner wearables. It was great.
I know, and I sometimes will have little stuffed toys, and the pipe cleaners will start, wrapping around the necks, and then they'll start connecting them, and then I'll have the most gorgeous set of pipe cleaner sculptures at the end of the meeting. And I have never gone in a single sectoral meeting where people resent or feel weird about the toys. I will say at the beginning, these things are on the table to give you something to play with. They will not distract me at all. They actually improve your productivity. The neuroscience has told us that. So feel free to use them however you wish. Try not to use noisy toys, but although 17% only indicated, if you did nothing else, that would actually probably dramatically increase your engagement in meetings. And I have a couple of videos on how to use them in this course as well. So thanks for reminding me to bring that point up, and as well as your lovely story, Elise. All right, so we wanted to, I was going to lead off with a PowerPoint, and let me just share my screen. And just before I do that, I'll just.
And if you have questions, I see a couple of folks have raised hands. If you want to add your questions to the Q&A box or to the chat, we will absolutely be able to get to those really soon. I see some starting to come in there, and that's great. And I know there are some questions also coming in the chat, and I'll try and circle back to them. But if you can get them into the Q&A box, I'll be able to find them for sure when we get to that part.
Great. Now I have an interesting thing coming up. Are you seeing this slide? What is your burning question about how to lead engaging meetings?
Yep.
Okay, great. Okay, so my screen is going black when I do it, so I just wanted to make sure you could see it. But that's really what I'd like to know, and we'll take some time to address those questions, and there may be some that are already up there, but feel free to pop them in, and I will do my very best to answer. I won't be able to answer all of them, but I'm going to turn it over to Elise to help me with which questions are coming up.
All right, and what is your screen is going black. It's flipping between not black and then black. So the question is, what is your burning question about how to lead engaging meetings?
Yeah, every time I start the slideshow, it goes black.
Oh, it's a single slide. Yeah, don't start the slideshow. I think we've got it.
I'll just leave it the way it is.
How to lead engaging meetings, and go ahead and add your burning questions in the Q&A box, and we can start diving into those. Okay. So Jennifer asks, how do you change the culture of an organization where meetings are usually scheduled without an agenda and no one does any preparation for meetings?
Yeah, it breaks my heart to hear that question, and I know you're not alone, Jennifer. So to change the culture, it's a very it can happen very quickly. If you are leading meetings yourself, you can change the culture by simply starting to do it and letting people know. I've noticed in our organization, we tend not to have agendas. I want to make our meetings very efficient and effective, and therefore I'm providing you with a very short agenda, and I'm also telling you the key products that we want to get out of it. You could also, if you are just participating in that culture, you can go back to the person who has scheduled the meeting and say, can you please tell me what the key deliverables of this meeting are meant to be and how I should prepare for this meeting. So just, and if you have any influence at all with some of the senior leaders, talking about them, can we have a meeting about making our meetings more effective, and the simple task of creating agendas. And here's an example of what one would look like. And also in this course at the very end, I have, let me just bring up that, I'm going to just change my screen. Hold on a sec. Yeah, so I've got this how to lead engaging meetings, and this is some of the content down below here. But at the very end, let me just keep going down here to show you. There's all kinds of categories. But at the very end, like, how do I put this all together into a meeting situation? So Jennifer, I have a couple of engaging meeting agenda samples, and if you create your own template, that could be something that everyone could use. Here's a template you can use. What's the main topic of the meeting? What are the key deliverables we want? What's the timing for the meeting? Who's invited? Here's our 3-part agenda. And here are our key resources you can look at ahead of time. So that can be, and feel free to write to me as well to ask for other meeting agenda templates. I'm happy to even pop some more into this course, because that's a great question.
Yeah, and actually Kathy Fisher put a basic outline into the chat too. So I think only panelists can see that, but what wonderful sharing we have from the people attending today. She says meeting objective, agenda, proposed outcome, meeting, pre-meeting prep, all good things.
Yes.
Are you ready
wonderful.
for another question?
Yes, I am.
So Marty wants to know, what's a good way to hold people accountable to meeting agreements, the code of conduct and whatnot, when behaviors go off track?
Yeah, let me just scroll through this in here. I just have a couple of things about, I think I have something about guidelines. But let me just answer your question. So again, have the visual of the group guidelines that you created. Maybe you just borrowed them from a couple of different sources. I definitely have a bunch of different sources on a blog that I've written. You're free to just put something up that people you think will agree to. You can have a short discussion before your meeting. Circulate it and say, which of these would you adjust or change? Or you could have 5 or 10 minutes at the beginning of a regular team meeting to say, these are some suggested guidelines we can work with. Which ones would you agree, can you easily agree with? And then anytime someone is not being accountable to a guideline, you might be able to say, first at the beginning of the meeting, I'd like us to hold each other accountable to these guidelines. And if we're having a problem being accountable to them, we should discuss why we cannot be. And then finally, anytime someone doesn't meet a guideline, like they're using their device or something like that, and the guideline is, we will check our devices at the door, you can say, hey, let me just check in with you. Is there something urgent? Would you like to step out of the meeting? Because our guideline is to not refer to our devices during the meeting. So again, it's just being, when you notice it, just being gentle and saying, this is our guideline. I'm wondering what's going on for you that makes it hard for you to follow this. And I'm happy to have other people suggest things. That's just one way of handling it. There's so many different ways. So feel free to answer the question in the chat pod as well. That'll keep you engaged.
Awesome. Well, speaking about engagement in a remote environment, there are several questions around that. So how do you get engagement on a conference call? And another variation of the question is, how do you get engagement on a conference call, especially if only some of the people are calling in?
Yeah, it's when you're that blended, some people are in the room and some people are calling in. And I've written a couple of blogs on this, but I think there's so many great platforms now to keep people engaged. You notice we used a lot of polls. We had people chatting in the chat box. It's in this remote environment. If I've got people who are calling in and it's just the conference call environment, I will often check in with them first. I'll say, okay, so we're going to do a round robin or a go round. Let's just make sure who's on the line again. Okay, so Dario is can you go first, please, and answer that question? And then somebody can even be typing Dario's answers on the screen, or whatever they're saying. And you could also assign a buddy to each person calling in so that they can be send photos of data that's being put up, or make sure that they've got, that if the data is not provided ahead of time, send photos of the meeting room. So you're always sort of hand holding the phone in people, and making sure that they know they're going to be called on a regular basis, so they're not taking advantage of not being seen, because they know at any moment I could get called on. And we do regular, and then for pairs work for that blended phone situation as well. You can say, hey, Joe, who's in the meeting room, is going to call you, Dario, and you're going to have a 5-minute conversation about this, and come back, and Joe and you will report your results. And so again, it's a way to keep people engaged with using the small group format. Those are just a couple of ways, but you can find it. If people are all in the virtual format, you can put them in small groups using different platforms. Zoom can do that. Adobe Connect for meetings can do that. And there's a ton of tools out there to actually make a virtual meeting feel even more productive than an in-person meeting. And because I have noticed I can put people in breakout rooms immediately. There's no walking to a breakout room. I can bring them back immediately, and I can have their data up on the screen immediately from each of the breakout rooms. So there's actually no reason for us to think that engagement has to be less in a remote setting.
And I know that in the remote setting, there are some really, all the things that you think you can't do in a remote setting, for the most part, you can, like the exercises like Human Map, where you have people say, how do you feel on this issue? And they move in space, for example. You can do that in the frame of your browser window, on a scale of low to high, how do you feel? And have people show you in video. So there are a lot of ways to make that go that are very cool.
Right.
Great
Yeah.
answer.
Using whiteboards, having people indicate where they sit on a quadrant, using the chat pod a lot. And the very simplest ways are just like having people add to the chat pod, making sure every question is posted visually, and that the people who are not in the room, if it's a dual situation of room not in the room, making sure that there's somebody always monitoring their attention and concentration, so that you're connecting with them every 5 to 10 minutes.
So another question, what Richard asked, what are some of the best ways to start a meeting?
Well, we talked about one of the best ways earlier, and that's like just start people on a positive note. But I really do believe in getting every voice heard early. And I learned this from Nancy Luna Jimenez, but just like, what's one thing that's going well for you on this project or in your life? Just have everybody do a quick go around. And it's if you establish that as a routine, that first 5 minutes will be, you try and make sure that everybody understands this is not a 2-minute response, this is a 30-second response, and you can always pass. But people tend to then show up on time, because otherwise they miss that lovely personal sharing. So get everyone to talk early on a positive question that connects people in a short time frame would be my favorite way of starting. Obviously, some people start with the agenda guidelines and the agenda, and an alternate way to do that is say, can I read over the agenda and read over the guidelines, chat with your neighbor about what you're most looking forward to in this meeting, and then let's share.
Nice.
That basically get every voice heard super early. Bottom line.
Everybody in the room. So that's about starting early. Now, Richard asks, How long do you think meetings should be? Like, so you can start off with a bang, but at what point are you going to lose things if you want to maintain maximum engagement?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people are into stand-up meetings, and the 20-minute stand-up meeting is great when it's a regular thing, or it can be a single focus. People think they have to have hour-long meetings, but why don't you just call a 27-minute meeting? I mean, get people's attention. This meeting is going to last 27 minutes. Put the dinger on, 27 minutes, everybody can get up and walk away. Like, oh, that's really cool. So just kind of get people out of their usual habits. Obviously, if you need to have a 2 or 3 hour meeting because there's maybe 3 really big topics, or a topic that's going to require to chunk it down into 3 or 4 different activities. You do those energizing activities I talked about, getting people to take a break halfway through for 5 or 10 minutes. Make sure that you have some snacks and water. So people's attention span is really about 20 minutes these days. If you can get your meeting done in 20 minutes, that's great. But if you can't, then you got to use a lot of other tricks.
So when you run multi-day meetings, how long will you go before you feel like you're like, I can't go any farther than this before we have a break?
I generally don't let more than 2 hours go without a break. And that's even with a lot of engaging activities. People are working in small groups. People are walking around using the gallery walk, which we talk about in this course. They're brainstorming ideas on Post-it notes. They're still busy, but after 2 hours, 2 to 2.5 hours, I would still give them a break where they can walk away and just look at something else and get a snack, use the bathroom, whatever they have to do. But yeah, absolutely no more than 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
And Beatrice said 90 minutes. Yeah, so that's great.
Yeah, cool. So another question that's come up. So let's say you've got that planned. You've started well. You've got your breaks planned and whatnot. One of our attendees wants to know, okay, I've got my agenda, but how do I keep an attendee, especially a superior, from hijacking the meeting so that you can follow that plan?
Oh my goodness, yes. This is the age-old question of like, how do I deal with people who are my superiors? Sorry, I've got my little dinger ringer going here. And and who's asking the question? Or several people asking the question?
That was an anonymous submission.
Okay, that was an anonymous submission.
I would just say we get the question of how do we make this work when our boss is not on board?
Okay,
pretty much on every webinar. So an anonymous multitude is what you've got there.
Okay, great. So people who are senior can be intimidating, and if you can meet with them ahead of time and just make sure they know the agenda and see if there's any places where they absolutely feel they'll have to contribute, ask what role they'd like to take in which pieces, and kind of include them. That's not always possible, but at the very least you might be able to work with their executive assistant and say, this is the agenda and this is how I would like our leader to, I'd really like some feedback from the leader in this piece here. The rest is just for her or him to hear, some of the background. That's one thing that may or may not be possible. But in the actual meeting, you might say by hijacking, it could be that the person is just talking a lot, and you might say, Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so, or whatever their name is, may I interrupt you? And they might look a little startled, right? And they'd say, I'd like to just sum up what I think I've heard you say. And then I want to make sure that that everyone else has understood what you're trying to say. I am aware that we got 10 minutes left, and I want to make sure that we've heard what you say and that we can move on to the next agenda item. Would you be willing to have us share back what we think we heard? And they might even say, oh, no worries. I just wanted to say blah, 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 and then they'll shut up, But sometimes they have a variety of reasons for why they might speak up or so-called hijack the meeting, and you need to be sensitive to that, but you also need to interrupt it as respectfully as you can.
Nice. So in those situations where you know in advance that the meeting's going to be discussion heavy, which means you're more likely to run into those problems with the dominators or the hijackers. Samantha wants to know, how do you prep individuals to come ready with questions or ideas, and how do you make that heavy discussion meetings more engaging?
Unfortunately, after decades of trying to get people to prepare for meetings ahead of time, I have to admit that I'm not overly expecting them to become prepared. You might get 10% of people who have done their homework. So what I do is I build into every agenda time for people to actually read a document in the meeting. And it's not half an hour, it's like 5 minutes. I got highlighter pens. I put out the document. They say, you three read the first, third of it, the first 2 pages, and highlight key points, and you three can highlight the next 3 pages. And so it could be a print out a document, or it could be, they get out their screens and they're looking through, and I want you got in 5 minutes, you're going to sum up the key points of this piece. That way, it's what you are doing is you're getting everybody literally on the same page relatively quickly. Obviously, that's not an in-depth thing, but once they know that you are going to call on them, it becomes a sort of a standard operating procedure that we'll have 5 minutes to review this, but if you want to have a more in-depth look, you need to look at it ahead of time. But at least they've got that 5 minutes, and they're not responsible for summarizing up the whole document. But then the whole group has their head inside whatever the data is, whatever the prep work was needed, and then your discussion can be richer.
That's that practice is also it's a foundational, like basically ground rule to how Amazon runs all of their corporate meetings. So they begin all of their meetings with a silent reading period to both help people's head connect to the content of the meeting, but to build the prep time into the meeting itself.
That's fantastic. I'm really glad to hear that, Elise. Because ultimately, even if people have read the document 3 days earlier, there's 3 days of other stuff stuck in their head, and we need to get our heads, refocused, 5 minutes before the discussion on the very specific topic.
Specific topic switch. Rex wants to know, he says he just hates it when people are on their cell phones texting while in a meeting. How can he approach that? So obviously they don't have a ground rule about that in place already. So what do you do?
I think because I tend to lead more formal meetings, I'm brought in as a paid consultant or facilitator. I can get away with stating that as a ground rule or asking people ahead of time. But you could. It's a little bit easier for an outside person to say that versus an inside person. But I think maybe you could bring it up. You could put on the top of your agenda, please, one of our ground rules will be, no consulting your devices. And then you can state it again at the beginning. I mean, you could make a joke of it and say, okay, give me your device. Here's a basket for your device. Pop it in the basket. You're not going to refer to it for the next 20 minutes. Keep your meeting short enough that if they say, oh, I'm expecting a call, then you can say, well, then you have the group discuss, how to handle that. Maybe one person needs to keep, their child is sick or something, and they need to just keep their eye on it. Can you make sure that, that the way you're checking it is only for that particular use? It takes a lot of guts, but ultimately we're losing so much productivity and so much clear thinking because we're trying to multitask all the time on our devices. And I think we do ourselves a favor by having that conversation about how can we not do this in our meetings. Elise, what would you add? Or anybody?
Well, yeah. So Kathy also mentioned to get a basket and collect the cell phones. But I think the best piece of advice I ever got on that one was from someone who was in the educational space dealing with students who are on their phones all the time. And they were like, what kind of rules do we need to have? And should I stand there next to them and make them feel awkward and all of that? And the advice was, people who are talking and actively working in the meeting are not on their cell phones. So your best bet is to design a meeting where they don't have time to be texting other people because they are there participating, engaged, and contributing actively to what's going on in the room. You know, if they're standing up and they're writing and they're working in small groups and whatnot, they're not texting. So the real answer is take Barbara's course and build a more engaging meeting in the front so that problem never happens.
Yeah, I agree. That's why I don't see it. I actually don't see that behavior because we have them working all the time.
Right. So we have time for just a couple more questions before we wrap up. Speaking of wrapping up, Marie or Mary asks, post-meeting action items and the best way to capture and keep participants accountable. So let's say you've got an engaging meeting. What do you need to do to make sure that you get the results from that in the end?
Yeah, I didn't cover this specifically in this course. I have it in another both precursor to this course and follow-up. But I would just say, have a flip chart or whiteboard or PowerPoint or something, and someone's capturing after each discussion the key action item. And so there's the action item, then who's going to be taking charge of making sure that it gets delivered on the due date. So, that's a running list that you keep going as your meeting progresses. And then at the end, you can sum up, okay, so here's our action items. Let's make sure the people who are assigned to them can commit. Marie, can you commit to this action item? And if not, who can we have as a backup person to you? So I don't believe in leaving people totally alone to do something, but to try and create little mini teams so that no one person feels unsupported in what they've been asked to do.
Nice. And in the chat, Marty mentions that, for routine meetings, it's sometimes good to just leave 5 minutes at the end to reflect on how it went and any adjustments. So building in accountability, not just for the minutes and the action items and all that, but for the meeting engagement and performance itself.
Yeah. And I think that there's one more, I'm just reading one more question about a limit to how many attendees. Let me just answer that really quickly from Jennifer. Mm-hmm. How many attendees can you have for a meeting to be focused? If you know good facilitation techniques, there's no limit to the number. I've done it with 350 people and gotten a fantastic decision from stakeholders, for example, around early childhood education. But typically, because you're using these engaging techniques of breaking people into small groups, getting them to synthesize information, bringing it back, always, divergent information and bringing it to convergence, then I would say, the ideal meeting size is about 16 to 20, but 12 to 20, say. But using these engaging meeting techniques, you can go much higher.
And research-wise, for people who don't use engaging meeting techniques, which is very common in the corporate world, they found that if you get past 4 or 5, you've started to lose it. Because that's sort of the size where we are naturally equipped because we learned how to talk to people nicely at the dinner table to stay engaged. But beyond that, you need to actually have some skills and techniques. Now, we are right here in the last few minutes of our promised time, and because we are good meeting citizens, we do want to end on time. I know there are more questions here than we got to, but we're going to wrap up and just let you know a little bit about this course that we've mentioned a couple of times. So Barbara's here, and she shared many answers with us already, and then you can learn more if you are interested in enrolling with her in her How to Lead Engaging Meetings course. I have taken it myself because we take all of the courses that are in meeting school and found it both engaging and helpful. I actually tweaked some of the techniques in my workshop after having watched the course. And so this week only, one of the questions was, how do we get access to this material that Barbara's been talking about? So this is live now. We went ahead and launched this course. It's live now. And for this week until October 5th, it's $97. And that gives you permanent access to the course. And if she does go back and add an extra template or anything, you'll get that in perpetuity. It also gives you access to join us in our community Slack and ask live questions for me and my team and the other meeting school courses. On October 5th, that price will increase. And then this course going forward, if you come back, 2, 3 weeks, 2 months later, and you say, you know what, I've got to figure out how How to lead a more engaging breakout. That course will be there, and it will be $197 at that time. So we'll have a link to that and all of that information in the follow-up email, including a recording. The other thing we'll include a link to is Barbara's website and her blog, because as she mentioned, she's got a whole bunch of great material there as well. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and share the last slide on our part. And thank you all so very much for joining us today. As you go forward, consider signing up and enrolling in that course. You get a $100 launch week discount, as we mentioned. That'll be good through October 5th. And then join us again for those of you who do enroll or who use our Lucid Meetings platform or are enrolled in any of our other courses for our first customer-only Lucid community gathering. That's going to be October 22nd. You will get a private invite to that if you're in the Lucid community. And that's going to be a live in-person community of practice. So we'll explore a specific engagement technique. We'll practice it. You'll get hands-on small group work in a live remote setting October 22nd. So we're looking forward to that. And with that, I would like to thank you all so much for joining us today. Thank you, Barbara, for taking the time to put this together and to present and to give so many great answers.
Oh, thank you. It's just a delight to be with like-minded folks who want to change the way we run meetings.
Yeah. And as we close out the webinar, I'm going to invite you to give us feedback in a quick survey. We would love to see that. All right, everybody, have a great rest of your day.